Da-da-da-da-do.
What's up, dude?
What's up? I'll give you the cheers, the coffee cheers.
Storyville Coffee, future sponsor.
Ding. Who said
Some
ding?
good stuff.
Who dinged? Was that me that just dinged?
You did.
I don't want to ding.
Turn
off the ding.
Yeah. What's up, everybody? Thanks for coming back or being here for the first time.
Howdy. I have a question for you.
Bring
The
it.
song that just played of
Yeah.
yours.
The intro music.
Intro music. Song called Cage. Great song. I think there's an award for that song back there somewhere. Isn't there? Don't hide it. It's in the way back behind your speakers.
It's complicated. That's not an award for the song. They called the first, no. One of the Broken City shows, Broken City Percussion, was called Cage.
They use that song though.
It was
Don't try
initially,
to downplay it. Come on.
initially partially inspired by that song, and then they did not end up using any of the song.
Oh, what? But what about was it rhythms from the song in the show?
I don't even think that. It was more like the concept, and then actually Mike was sitting in here on the couch and looked at that art piece of mine up there that has the big
The cow
backbone. Yeah.
cow head guts.
The cow spine. And nope, I just said it myself. I think that might have been when he was inspired for the show Spine. And then Cage was also like rib cage. It was all kind of mixed together. There's like, the creative process is nutty with that stuff. It's like a million things, and they're pulling from my catalog to get inspiration. Sometimes they use songs, sometimes they don't.
Oh, that's cool.
But anyway, so what was...
Do we need to, hold on, do we need to explain? I think probably a lot of
question.
listeners know what Broken City Percussion is. Should we explain it, just in case? What is it?
Yeah, the quick description is Broken City Percussion. They're like a, I think they're in world class. It's a competitive percussion ensemble, and they're in, like, a lot of these kids will be in high school doing it, and then when they get out of high school, there's a couple options. There's drum corps you can do, and until I
Competition.
think I think you age out at 22 years old.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then there's the independent winter percussion, which is for people
When
who
it's
are
snowing.
There's mostly 18 to 20.
When you're wearing a parka and you're playing a bass drum.
Yeah,
Got it. Winter.
that's all part of it.
Winter NAM, summer NAM. Okay.
Anyways, yeah, for people who are mostly 18 to 22 years old, do that.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a way to...
And that starts as drumline,
Yeah.
high school drumline, or whenever they
Yeah, I think
start.
it's pretty rare that somebody would actually be in the winter percussion that hasn't been indoctrinated into that whole world of
it's a
marching
whole
arts.
world, man. I fun fact.
Yeah.
I've told you this before. I actually did drumline in high school for I don't even think it was a full year. But I had friends that were, I was actually the drummer that was in the band that I was in high school, our metal band. He's a really great drummer, still is, but he was in drumline in high school, and he talked to me and a couple other friends that were also in that band, like to join the drumline. He's like, dude, it's basically just a free class, like a free period.
Okay.
We can just go in there and do whatever we want. And he was a little militant about it, like most drumline people are.
Yeah.
He made me play snare, and I was like, oh, great, this is so hard. All the rudiments and stuff, I can't play any of that anymore. I could barely do it back then. But I remember we'd practice on the same snare drum.
Yeah.
If I screwed up, he'd smack my stick. Smack. Do it right. Like, oh, it's so hard.
It's an intense little subculture.
Yeah, so I got a little glimpse of it, and those guys are amazing. And so I knew a little bit about drumline when I first saw Broken City. Those guys are amazing, dude. I mean, that's like top of the game right there, right? Those competitions they do.
Yeah, they're in like kind of the top class of, like the older people doing it, older kids, the 18, 19, 20, 22, 20, you know how the numbers go in order like that.
Oh, that's how numbers work.
Yeah. I don't still need more coffee.
The number.
But yeah, they've been the top few of the world the last handful of years.
World.
Yeah, they do.
Dang.
Finals are in Dayton, Ohio, and it's in a big sports arena, and there are lines that fly in from Japan and
That's insane.
all over the place to
I know about Blue Devils.
compete. Yeah, so that's drum corps. That's
Drum
the
corps,
summer.
Okay.
the
I know
summer
about
version.
that from, I have a couple of friends that after we did it in high school, became like really into it. My buddy Chris Wolf, what's up? I know he's listening. He told me he was listening. I sent him. What was the thing I did? I came over and did a vocal for something, and sent it to one of those. It was Blue Devils, right? Yeah, I told Chris right away. I was like,
it was either Blue Devils or RCC. I can't remember which. Probably Blue Devils. It was With or Without You.
Yeah,
Jim
I just sang
Wonderlit.
the vocal track, and then they flew it into their show or something, and then later I saw a video of it, and I was like, yeah, I'm in the show.
Yeah, maybe somebody out there will know. It's one of
cool.
Jim Wonderlich's lines. I'll have to find out which.
Yeah,
but
that was fun.
Anyway, you had a question about Cage. Was that the question?
That's it.
All right,
I'm done. I wanted to ask you about the award. No, I wanted to ask you about that song because so cool in the intro. All right, this is my impression of it. What is that? Is that you just slapping your knee? Did you just put a mic on your pants? Pants mic?
No.
Lapel mic?
You know what's
on your
funny
pants?
is Mike actually was doing that on his pants and said Cage the other day. I'm like, it's not pants. It's
Pant?
a bag.
One pant.
No, it is a Costco-sized bag of snap peas that my mom gave me. Like she had seen that I was like eating them one day. They're super addictive too. They're like, they call them snappies, but really it's just like a chip that's in the shape of a pea.
Okay.
And so she bought me this like big bag of them. Oh my God, this is going to make me so sick. But it was sitting in the studio and I went over to it and I was like, psh, ooh.
With a drumstick?
I hit it like with my hand and I'm like, ooh, that's a cool like texture. So yeah, I threw it in front of a mic, got some drumsticks and so that's like.
So it was with drumsticks.
I believe it was with drumsticks, maybe mallets. And then,
dude, it's so weird because you just picture a guy slapping his knee. Why don't you just do that?
That's not the right texture, dude. It's way off.
Wow, that's interesting.
It had like because you hit the bag. This is what's happening in like milliseconds of time.
Yeah, slow-mo.
You hit the bag on the outside, and then you crush it in, and you start to hit some snappies, and then you start to break the snappies, and then it stops. So it's like,
are you calling them snappies?
Snappies,
not snap peas.
I don't have time for that space, dude. So it's a really interesting shh on every single one.
Yeah.
Right here, you just got pant and then skin. You're not like breaking an actual snappy.
Couldn't you put the snappies in your pants and then?
That I do, yeah. But just
just for fun though.
Yeah, just
it's not for recording.
Yeah, on the weekends I just do that.
Interesting. So that's the intro. Snap peas. Snappies.
And I don't know if they ever go away. No, I may have filtered them throughout, but
yeah, I think they go through the whole song.
The other thing about that song too is I wanted this really vacuumous, dry drum sound, which is sort of like when I was younger, that type of drum sound, I would have thought it was stupid.
I know exactly what you mean.
No
air, just
yeah, and very like not rim shots, very center of the drum, playing quiet but intense, and I wanted there to be no sense of space, almost like it was somebody drumming quietly and
the life just sucked out of the thing.
Out in the solar system somewhere. So I went in to the drum room and found a huge blanket and put it over my head and over the drums.
Wait, for what?
To record the drums. So I put a mic up kind of by my head, and then I had the drums close mic'd and a blanket covering all of us. And it was like dampening me, the hi-hats, the snare, the kick, and the blanket was like draped over the hi-hats too. So it was like muting them.
Whoa.
And then I played with mallets.
Why does that have to be over your head though? Because you can feel like you're part of the...
Well, I had an overhead mic. And if it's open to the room, you're getting slapped back from the room, you're getting the sound of the room. Yeah. I wanted to be able to turn that up and only get... So it's cutting off basically... It was like basically a real-life low-pass filter or high-pass filter.
Yeah.
Which one?
Whichever one lets the...
Yeah. Low pass. So it was like cutting the high end down in terms of the reverb you might get from compressing the overhead mic.
Yeah.
You'll end up getting more ambience. So I wanted this really tight thing. So I'm like under a blanket going.
By yourself. I'm just picturing you by yourself in the studio, like with a blanket over you.
It looked like a ghost, a bad ghost
through this
costume.
window. I don't know if the camera can see that, but that's the drum kit through that window. Yeah. That's the live room. I would just love to have seen just a shot, just a video of you. I'll put this over my head, and then it's like you can see the blanket like kind of coming up when you hit the cymbal.
I should have cut eyes out in a real ghost costume, but it really it worked.
Interesting.
It's the only time I've ever done that.
Sounds killer. And then the guitar comes in.
Yeah.
What guitar was that?
I believe that
Telly?
was my Telly.
Mm-hmm. Which is not here, right? Is that in the other studio?
That's in Julian.
Telly's
Anyways,
amazing.
boring details.
This is the stuff that I like. So when I hear a podcast, I want to hear talk. I want to hear boring details. But we'll stop with that.
I'm a treasure trove of those.
I love your boring details because they're recording related boring details.
Speaking of boring details,
Here comes a segment called Boring Details.
and here's an example of boring detail through the eyes of my father. So the other day I was talking about, I think he asked me what I had been doing or something, and I was like, oh, I was mixing the song, and it's like, oh, I remember. He was like, this is probably going on maybe 10 years ago, but he was over here helping put some cabinets in our hallway.
Pops?
This is when the studio was in the front house.
Oh, yeah.
And Andy and I were working on a mix, and he was in the hallway working on these cabinets for probably like 4 hours or something. And he's like, you guys played this one section of the song probably 1,000 times. And he's like, it was driving me crazy. I could not imagine you like doing that. That's part of what you do is just listen over and over. What is going on? Like, I could not do it. And I'm like, well, we're not listening to the same thing.
Right. You're not listening to everything, which is what he's hearing. Just the same, like he's hearing the whole picture. Right?
Yeah. And my dad's he was a refinery designer, like nuclear refinery engineer.
Whoa.
And
fancy
early on,
dad.
Right?
I didn't know that about your fancy dad.
Yeah, he's pretty fancy.
Wow.
He worked on a project too that was like that never got off the ground, but it was about a sprinkler system for the space shuttle. So when it took off, it would actually cool down and put out all the fire, so they didn't have to actually rebuild the liftoff apparatus that holds the space shuttle, because it basically blows it away every time.
Whoa.
This is back in the 80s.
Oh, the actual thing that's on the ground.
The part that's on the ground.
Yeah, it's so crazy when you watch one of those old space shuttles. It's just a huge explosion. Just ooh, and there's like some mushroom cloud, and then the thing. Ooh.
I just remember that one of his team members had created this like cartoon of a space shuttle, and it had a bunch of dudes hanging off a space shuttle with hoses and stuff, like they were gonna like
put the
yeah,
fire.
It was like a cartoon version of what they were working on. But so I was like, no, it's as if when you're looking at, let's say you're looking at couple square inches of a design,
right.
You're thinking like, okay, what's the functionality? What's the aesthetic? Does it make sense? What's this going to look like in real life? You're like looking at all these different layers behind, and somebody might just see you staring at one thing for a super long time on your drafting table, pre-computer. So it's weird just to think about. His perception was you guys are just listening to the song over and over. And I'm like,
he's also not in the room too. If you were outside of the studio and you heard the same, you might think that too.
Completely.
You don't even know. First of all, you don't know what detail you're looking at, but also you're just hearing it from outside the room.
Yeah, the further you get away, the more simplified it seems. But also just, that's one of my favorite things about music, and I think it's when I think about perceiving things, like when I'm working on a mix, listening to a song 1,000 times, there's a small percentage of the time that I'm listening to it in one way, like for the whole thing, like trying to listen to it as a whole, and then you dig in, you're like, okay, now I'm going to listen to it for depth and width, and now I'm going to listen to it for just the drums, and now just the guitars, and now overall impact, and you're
Can
cranking
you do
it
that?
up and turning it down.
Is it easy for you to toggle back and forth with that
mentally?
Yeah, especially once it's done. I only ask that because I've had so many recording experiences where you obviously, especially if you're singing and you're listening to your voice and you're like, you tend to like really concentrate on that, and then once the song's done, it's almost like you have to force yourself to just listen to it zoomed out anymore, because it's mixed now and there's no point in obsessing over details or listening to this and that. You have to listen to it like other people hear it, right? Which is like your dad was hearing it as a whole.
Yeah.
That's hard to kind of, at least for me, it's hard to toggle back and forth between focusing on details of a song that I was a part of, and then zooming out and seeing the whole thing.
Yeah, it's
Do you have trouble with
definitely.
that, or is that am I just
Well, I would
weirdo?
say that it's been. I don't know if it was incredibly conscious, but I know that my goal has been to get better at being able to just flip it like a switch
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what part of the mix I'm focusing on, and then it's right brain, left brain activities, like
Right.
listening to how the sonics are affecting the emotion of the song,
Yes.
and then how that's working on every instrument, and then how each instrument is interacting, and then
Is one taking away from the
you
emotion
have
of the
like,
song.
because you have like sonic real estate, so there's only so much you can put in every frequency before you start to overload the frequency or get too much interaction in a bad way, or there's ways to mush it together, and that's on purpose. And so the ability to sort of zoom in, zoom out, zoom over, zoom sideways, like all these dimensions in a way, is something that I've been just like working on my entire life. And I'll work on it forever until I die.
So there's one thing that I probably everybody does this, that's in the studio with big speakers and the artist is there and you're tweaking, you're recording, and then at one point you go, let's hear it, and then you crank the speakers up, and then that's the point where you click over to now we're listening to the whole thing, right? Because you want to feel what the song's doing. So the speakers go up, and then you can hear there's more bass response or whatever the speakers do. Is that like the time when you click over? Okay, now we're gonna back up. We're gonna zoom out and turn it up and see what it feels like.
Well, I'm constantly doing that, and I tend to mix pretty loud.
Yeah, some guys do real quiet, right?
I just love
Whisper quiet.
I love the impact of music. I think from being a drummer,
Yeah,
I'm attracted to the actual physical. I don't know. There's something about the
visceral kind of feeling
aspect.
of the song.
So I like to mix in such a way where it sounds good at all volumes, but especially that you can crank it and it doesn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of a double-edged sword because it's not healthy to listen really loud. And these speakers in particular too, they're called PMC speakers, which stands for Professional Monitor Company.
That's horrible.
It sounds like a company being a cartoon, like Acme Speakers. Professional Speaker Company, Monitor Company. So, but they're incredible speakers, and they actually told me when I bought them, like, get an app, a really good decibel meter app.
Oh, so you don't blow your
and
face off?
check it, because these speakers have such low distortion that you'll be listening over 100 decibels and not even notice it.
Whoa.
Because they're not distorting. Usually the red alert sign is like, it sounds bad, but these will just sound, and sure enough, I'm
surprised your hearing's still good.
Often
You're not only doing that, but you're also a drummer, and you've been a drummer forever.
Yeah.
Drummers can't hear because they smash cymbals so.
And the other day I woke up after a full day of mixing and I was driving in my car with the music too loud, and just everything sounded dark. And I was like, ooh, something.
Could be a head cold or something.
And I kept checking all the different mixes that I knew how they sounded. And I'm like, everything's equally dark. I hope it comes back. I got that scared feeling. Like,
did I lose a certain frequency?
Yeah.
Did I lose the 10K in my ears?
Because I've heard there's stories of people who were like, yeah, one day I just went click and then I couldn't hear.
Oh, that's so scary.
But it came today. I was driving here, listening to the same things, going, yeah, that sounds
It's back.
exactly how I thought it did. But there was a full day there, and I was, yeah, it's rough. But what were we talking about? So, yeah, perceiving music. So this is what happened.
Musics.
After thinking about that and talking with my dad, I'm like, we're listening to all these different things and for different reasons, and at the end of the day, you don't feel like you've listened to it that many times, and then you want to listen to it on different speakers, and that's like hearing a completely different thing. So I had this one experience that got me thinking about the difference between the way musicians hear lyrics and then all the different kinds of music-based artists, like people who focus on mixing or producers or singers. Or one of the classic things, which is a good little example, is that when you work with a band or an artist, and especially a band, you can just guarantee
the
when
bass
they
player
hear the
is
mix,
be like, turn the bass up.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say bass.
The
I should say
guitar
guitar
isn't
player.
loud
It's
enough.
always the guitar. It's always us guitar players. Can I get the little more of that?
It usually is. It's basically just more me.
More of me. Drums louder, whatever, if you're the drummer.
More of me and less of you.
Yeah.
And, but, so I had this experience where I was, you know, that state where you're like falling asleep and you're awake, but you're not. And it's kind of a nice stage to be in. I was watching, I think it was like the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, Music Hall of Fame. There is such a thing, right? There's
Hall
a few
of
different
rock and
ones.
roll,
I think it was Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And that was on, and I like and then fell asleep, but then woke up and wasn't awake, but I was watching it, and it was Stevie Wonder and Sting and a bunch of other people, like a all-star band, but I just remember particularly Stevie Wonder and Sting were on stage.
Higher Ground? What were they playing? I think I saw this.
Really?
I can't remember the song.
There was a few different songs, but yeah, Higher Ground pretty sure was one. I think
and Stevie Wonder
doing
sounded
Message in a Bottle.
amazing still.
Yeah.
Right.
But what happened is I woke up and was like half asleep watching. I was like, this is the greatest live performance I've ever heard. And I was freaking out.
Quietly freaking
I felt
out.
like everything was perfectly in tune. And like I was having this experience of music that was just, I couldn't believe it. And because I was falling asleep, I had like DVR'd it and woke up the next day, played it, and it was like hearing it as a different person. The performance was good, but I was just hearing flaws everywhere and like, oh, that's a good performance. But yeah, they sing a little sharp, sing a little flat. Sonically, this, that, like hearing all the stuff like I normally do. But the night before, I had gotten this, part of my brain wasn't turned on. I was half asleep.
Right.
And I experienced it.
The analytical part might have been shut down for a minute.
So the analytical part and some sort of perception thing was just off.
From what you would usually analyze, at least.
Yeah. And I looked back and I was like, if this is the way it's possible to hear music all the time, it'd be a whole different experience.
Yeah.
It's the blessing and the curse, I think, of
Right.
hearing it and understanding it. And I think, take that to the extreme, when I hear really intense, harmonically intricate, like jazz that's, we're talking some of the most intense, like Miles Davis stuff, or sax players coming to mind. What's the guy? Ultimate
Dizzy
dude.
Gillespie?
No,
He didn't
trumpet.
play saxophone, he played trumpet. Dang it. I'll edit that out.
Couple
so I
of
look like an
idiots.
idiot.
Major editing on this one.
What, trumpet?
Ba, 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 da, 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 da.
I don't know, but you're doing it with a guitar pick.
Giant Steps. What the hell is his name?
Oh.
Computer.
I don't know, dude. I'm drawing a blank.
Just write in Giant Steps, and then I'm going to feel like an idiot. Giant Steps. Sax.
John Coltrane.
John Coltrane.
Coltrane.
So they're an absolute genius, and when they're improvising, over changes, but then they can take the changes somewhere else, and everybody's hearing exactly where the changes are going, and
Right.
like Giant Steps is a
Giant
super
step.
famous. What?
It's a giant step.
It's a giant step for mankind and sax kind. Those changes are happening so fast, like chord, and there's key changes all the time. And soloing over that is one of the things that a lot of jazz musicians like strive to be able to completely improvise over those changes and be hitting all the changes. So it's like every one of those chords is like you can play certain notes over them to be really navigating them correctly while phrasing, while doing something
that aren't
unique.
common tones that work over every chord, but you can hear the chord changes.
So I'm not particularly gifted in that area where I can, like I've known some people that you can go up to a piano and play a chord cluster of like 8 notes and they can pick out all the notes that you're playing. And I've tested some people on this before. And when I hear a chord cluster, I can like pick a few notes that I could sing with it that work. But I tend to immediately hear it as a feeling and a timbral thing. I see it really intensely timbrally, and then I feel an emotional thing like, oh, if I sing this note or this melody over that cluster, it's going to feel right.
Mm-hmm.
But the first place, like, I don't see like an array of notes in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I hear rhythms, I can kind of see the rhythm written or really technically do it, and then sonically I'll see it in such a way where I'll be like, oh, there's a lot of this frequency, whatever, down to the number. But harmonically, it hits me more as a feeling first. So I've had to develop that side of my harmonic, I guess, perception. But some people just have that. And I've noticed that the people that have that intense perception of music harmonically tend to not have it as much when it comes to the mixing side or the timbral side. They're focused on notes and not on tone as much. It's like a clarity thing. And then there are, of course, geniuses maybe that kind of see the whole picture of music really intensely on every level, but we're all trying to kind of fill in the gaps and have sort of natural gifting. But perception-wise, there's probably this really sweet spot where you're hearing music for what it is. It's in its totality, and that's our goal as musicians, is to be able to actually access that perception, that we can pull back and go, is this all working? Am I lost in the nuts and bolts too much? Because that's the worst thing, is when you're that guitar player in the band. It's like, turn me up. I'm the only thing that matters here. Right. As opposed to somebody, the great musicians.
Sometimes they're right, though. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes the guitar player needs to be louder. Okay. Sometimes you forget to mix them the right way.
Confirmation bias. No, yeah.
Depends on the music.
No, yeah. Yeah, no.
You're not going to
yeah, you're right.
To that.
You're always right. Because you're a songwriter who plays guitar.
That's right, but I've also done guitar sessions where I've been that guy. Like, let's just maybe bump it up a couple dB. Can we pan it hard right?
Sometimes it ends up being right because you don't realize that's one of the fun things of mixing, is actually throwing things at yourself. You try to learn to be multiple people. Like, what if I was the guitarist? And then you just sort of like crank something that you have buried in the mix. That's for cool. Some reason, like 2 hours ago, you put it here. Sometimes I'll just take something and go like, and like reverse the relationship between the two. Happens. And sometimes it'll just surprise me, like, whoa, that's like a whole different feeling. Yeah. And that'll affect, or I'll often do it. One of the great things about the digital technology and the ability to like have a plug-in, like the one called Trigger by Slate, where you have a drum sound like a snare or a kick, and just fly into this plugin as many as I think 6 or more different samples and layer them and whatever. I'll be going through and just be like, I'm just going to try a completely different snare and just see if, if I'm somehow too focused, And here's another rabbit hole, is that I'm obsessed with snare sounds. Being a drummer, also, like,
I don't think you have to be a drummer. You know what? Anecdotal story. When I remember being a kid and my sister had that Zeppelin record, I can't remember what record it was, but I remember putting it in the tape player because we shared a bathroom and there's a little tape player in there.
How sweet.
And pushing play and listening, because it's what my sister was listening to at the time. When she was in high school, she was into Zeppelin. And I remember one of the first things I noticed that I thought was good. I was a kid. I was probably not even a teenager, probably like maybe 11, 12.
Yeah.
Like a kid. I remember thinking that the drum sounded good, and it was the snare drum.
Whoa.
Like that was the thing that stuck out to me the most, was the snare drum. And listening to it now, I kind of see what I was hearing, because like John Bonham's snare drums always sound amazing. There's just like the perfect, to me, that's like the perfect snare drum for a rock sound, right?
Yeah. And you know who got close to that, surprisingly? Like early Van Halen records have a very similar snare sound.
Tommy Lee too. I was a Motley Crue fan when I was a kid, and I remember hearing Tommy Lee and thinking he's my favorite drummer. I didn't know anything about drums. I just knew the way it sounded.
He's actually a really good
drummer.
And
he really is a good drummer.
I heard Dr. Feelgood come on, or Kickstart My Heart or something. He has a good feel.
He does, yeah. And I didn't know that as a kid, but I loved the songs, and Bob Rock's production, obviously.
Right. It
was amazing. But I did notice the tone of the drums. I couldn't tell you what they were doing, or I wouldn't know what was happening. But I knew that the sound was like something that I liked. And I always think about that, because that just says so much about the emotion of the tone of an instrument in a song.
Yeah.
Even as a kid, I just,
And that was a definite, that was a huge turning point in drum sounds when when those Zeppelin, room mic'd plus his playing plus his tuning, everything that came together in that, magical. But when I was just talking about this with one of my students the other day, for the first time, I think ever, somebody who hired me to do a mix, actually, I invited them to come and he wanted to hang out and just watch me mix. And like most of the mixers I've worked with in the past, like when I've worked with Chris Lord-Alge or Jack Joseph Puig on a few things.
What did you do with Chris Lord-Alge?
The first thing we did was a Jeremy Camp record.
Oh,
he mixed some of our songs. Let It Fade was one that he mixed. Where I actually got in a little bit of an argument with him. Where I just asked for something and he didn't want to do it.
Really?
I'll get into that in a second.
Was he mixing super quiet? Because he's known to be a real quiet mixer.
Both those guys do it the proper way, which I don't do.
I just heard Howard Benson say he does that too.
They do it back and forth. I mean, because you can't. One of the things that Jack said when I was working with him, I worked with Jack Joseph on Joseph Jingleheimer Schmidt on.
That is new name.
Why do those mixers have three names? Don't they know? Only people who assassinate presidents have three names.
Assassinators.
John Wilkes Booth and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
et cetera.
He said when you listen too loud, you can't hear pitch and feel.
Feel?
Like
drum wise?
Yeah, like the intricacies of how things are interacting in terms of feel, like in time. And then you can't distinguish pitch with as much accuracy, which means that on some level you're not experiencing timbres with enough accuracy also.
Interesting.
Which explains why you can be at a show where the music is cranked and hear an iPhone recording of it and go like, whoa, I didn't realize the singer was that out of tune.
Tell me about it. As a guy being in bands and touring and then seeing videos the next night or the next day after that show, and you're like, oh, we sounded amazing. And then you hear it without the low end of the room mainly. You'll never get that, at least not yet, on an iPhone. You just, bummer. Certain things stick out more because of the frequency range, I guess.
Well, there's two reasons why that happened. I don't want to get off the snare drum thing either, but so I'll finish the snare drum thing, then I want to talk about that pitch thing because it's great. I went through a crazy experience.
Take a note. Can we take a note from that? Thanks, buddy.
Thanks.
Just remind us later. Okay. No, there's a guy over there.
Sit down. Okay. The thing with snare drum is that the reason why snare drum is so important to me partially is because I'm just a drummer and obsessed with snare sounds, but thinking about it, it's the one thing in the song that's happening the same most often. It's happening the same and the most often.
Right, and it doesn't change.
If that one thing doesn't suit the song or sound like it should, or you're
gonna cringe every 2 and 4.
Yeah, everything else. Most of the time is varying, and at least in some way. This is the thing that's the same note,
that's why I love when songs will switch up drum tones in the middle of a song for a different part or whatever.
Oh, right.
Just instantly. Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. It's definitely something that in pop music is played around with a lot. Like verses are snaps and choruses are claps or big snare, whatever. But when I was mixing his song, and it made me, when somebody's watching you do something you often do, kind of lost in your own world. He's sitting right next to me watching. Angel Ramirez Jr., shout out. He had showed me this song acoustically one time, like months and months before, but when I pulled it up, I realized how some of the things I do are kind of like don't necessarily make a ton of sense or require. I had to tell him like, okay, you might start hearing things and be like, that's not
right.
Don't stop. Like, I don't want you to panic.
Sure. Yeah.
And this is why I mentioned those other big mixer name guys. I wasn't just name dropping, but they won't let you come watch them mix
because they don't want to hear you over their shoulder. Like, no, I don't like that thing.
Yeah.
And they're just like,
they don't
shut
have
up.
to explain
I'm doing something here.
Yeah. Cooking the magic. Don't look.
Yeah.
First of all, they don't want to share their secrets usually.
Sure.
And then second one is they just don't want somebody screwing with, over their shoulder. So they'll call you when they're done and then it's time for tweaks.
Yeah.
And But Angel's cool, and I trust him, and he just wanted to see. So I was kind of walking him through. Like I was like, ask me anything as I'm going, and then
Yeah, this is also part of your teaching program, right?
to some degree, like this is sort of outside of it because
okay.
we had other plans for our hours together this semester. But he's like, I want to hire you to mix something. So he came in, and I was like, just don't worry. But if you have a question, and and I'm like, I start with the drums, and I just try to intuit. I literally solo up the drums, and I try to just intuit what the drums should sound like based on the performance and
without hearing the
how
rest
they
of
already
the
sound.
instruments.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot that the most common approach is
Vocals.
throw the faders up or listen to the rough mix first. That's what a lot of guys do.
I've heard, I don't remember who it was, but they were saying that they only start with the vocals no matter what.
Yeah.
Just solo the vocals and start tweaking the vocal before they hear the rest of the song.
I would say there are
that's
two
weird.
main schools of thought, which is start with the drums or start with the vocals.
We talked about that last podcast, right?
Just
You were saying the
those are the
drums
heart.
and the vocals are the most important thing in the song or whatever, and that's the foundation, and then the cherry on top is the vocal. And you were saying if you understand the relationship with those, then you can get a better mix.
Yeah, and even just in learning music, we talked about that. Just it's cool to be able to sing a little and drum a little because it's sort of, and those are the two things where you can put all your physical energy into them.
And the most
as
like
performers.
ancient instruments.
And the most ancient. But yeah, and in some way, also as you know that the vocal is going to be a focal point for the most part. And then also as you're gain staging, which is a super important element of mixing, is just sort of making sure that first of all, if you're tracking it, making sure you're recording at a nice level, negative 10, negative 15 dB. And then as you go through plugins, making sure you're managing how loud that channel is and where the fader's at, and then how that's feeding your mix bus. And
Why do you have to start so low? Devil's advocate here. Question.
You always just want to.
You're saying
The only
negative
reason
10 dB. You don't want the fader or whatever, the signal to go past
when you're recording.
when you're recording.
Yeah.
Is that for adding?
In the old
Stuff
days,
later.
when you're recording on analog, you're always battling signal to noise ratio. So you have.
And the louder you get, the more the
So the
noise
lower
comes
you
up.
record, the more. Here's the noise. Here's how loud the noise is. If you record just a little above it, then when you turn up that sound, you're turning up the noise
The
with
noise
it.
too, yeah.
So you got to record high enough to where if you turn that sound up, you're not turning up the noise to a point where you're starting to get a noisy recording with just hiss. That was an issue that you constantly had to deal with in the analog domain, recording to tape, and which I believe is why Dolby was invented, which like cut out the noise, or at least one aspect of what Dolby is. So in digital recording, the signal to noise ratio is so low that you can record a lot softer and not have to really worry about that as much. But then you also want to record hot enough to where you have enough signal to work with, but not too hot because digital distortion is usually just a bad thing.
Bad.
So, and then it all depends on what you're using going in. Like if you're saturating a
Preamp or
a
something.
preamp, and just a nice healthy middle ground is great, because the worst thing, especially in the digital domain, is when let's say you've recorded everything really hot and then you have to turn everything down on the faders, let's say. Or it's recorded so hot that it's hitting your plugin super hard and then you're distorting the plugin.
Then it's
or,
distorting the plugin.
And a lot of plugins are designed to, part of the design of the plugin, like especially modeling plugins that are modeling old pieces of gear.
Yeah.
They're trying to actually model what it sounds like to go into the plugin hard, as if you're going into the piece of gear hard. It actually sounds different. It's getting more, harmonic distortion or whatever, and then the output. So
A lot of those you can actually turn the rest of the plugin off and just have the sound of going through the emulation, right?
exactly, yeah. And so, now Pro Tools has a thing called clip gain, where you can actually, regardless of how hot it was recorded or soft, you can actually easily change the size of the waveform in a way that's really great, before you'd have to like put a gain plugin on it and apply it, or and you can do that with a trim plugin. You can put that before your first plugin or something and turn down the level there.
Oh.
And trim is just a very simple plugin that just has gain up and down. So the important thing is that you need, when you're recording at around negative 10, negative 15, you have all those 10 or 15 decibels before 0. And once you record, let's say 10 tracks, that's all going to add up and go eventually down to 2. So you're just always managing it so that you're not hitting things harder than you want to or too low, but better on the low side than the high side because of the signal to noise ratio. You're not really having to worry about it as much in digital. But so that just becomes really important. And what were we talking about? You
were talking about Angel watching you mix.
Oh yeah, so I was just kind of got off
like 20 minutes ago.
Major tangent.
It's my fault. I keep asking you questions because I want to know. I have my own personal questions that have nothing to do with this podcast. And I'm just going to sneak them in every once in a while.
It was just funny because I was working on the drums for over an hour and I didn't even know what the song was.
You didn't hear anything else?
I didn't hear anything else.
Interesting.
And, I'm like making all these decisions and working with all these plugins and really focusing on the kick drum sound and the snare. But I kept listening to what was recorded. And for some reason, they had chosen not to record a close mic on the snare. They had like a mid-side room mic, which had the most snare in it. And so I was kind of like, and he said, like, I would want you to use some samples to kind of beef it up. And
no
whatever.
Snare mic.
Yeah,
Is that a mistake?
No, they had just gotten a sound they liked through.
Cool. Just some Ringo Starr style where you just put like 2 mics over the head.
Kind of. I mean, they had a kick mic, they had tom mics, and they had stereo overheads, and they had this mid-side thing further away from, like in front of the kit. And they just decided that, a lot of the song didn't have cymbals, like he was just hitting kick and snare, and they just liked that. So I started picking, like I heard the snare drum they had recorded, worked with it a little bit, and was like, okay, I think I have my own. I make my own samples. That's a whole other rabbit trail we can go down. Yeah. But I have all these different snare drums, and I've recorded them in all different ways, hitting different volumes. And so I picked some snares that I had that were sort of in the family of the snare sound he had. I was like, okay, cool. Now I have a close mic version of that.
Cool.
So I started building this whole drum sound, and deliberately I was like, I like to be surprised
about the music.
Because I don't. If I heard the whole song, it might narrow my thinking a little too much. I want to make some mistakes that I know I can change.
Okay.
And see how much I can intuit. It's part of the fun of mixing. It's just sort of like you have this story that's being revealed to you, and you can decide to start in the middle, or you can.
You're just playing games with yourself. You're like, I'm going to pull a guitar in now. Just the drums and the guitar.
And it's really fun. And like you're tricking yourself into more creativity than maybe you otherwise would have. So
that's cool.
I'll get the drums done, then I'll pull up the bass, and I'll be able to see from the attitude of the playing on the bass if I'd made some good drum decisions. And then I think the next thing I did is I went to the vocal. Because I was like, I want to understand, have I made the drums too punchy and aggressive and he's singing really quiet? And is that going to be, are those going to relate in a good way? Or am I pulling too much of the ear to the drums? And
So what...
So it was just funny because it felt like I felt sensitive to the fact like that I might be disrespecting his song in some way. Like I don't.
But if he wasn't here, if he wasn't in the room, you would have done. That's what you would have done, right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have thought, oh, this guy might be feeling strange.
Yeah.
Every step of the way.
And there's a couple times where he wanted to say something like, "Oh, just so you know that you know."
Yeah. So when you pulled up the actual song after working on the drums soloed. Were you like in the wheelhouse, or did it?
Yeah,
did it work?
I was close, but I continued. The snare drum happened to be even more important than normal on that song because the whole verse was just a mellow, dark pad, vocals, drums, and like a, just do 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 bass. So the way the snare felt was like it was the thing in the mid range, apart from the vocal, that was owning that space. So if it didn't have the right texture or was hitting too hard or felt like it was too dumpy and not hi-fi enough, but if it was too bright and sizzly, like all those things, like that's another thing that I have to thank JJP, Jack Joseph Puig, for was I learned a lot through, that was the one time where I had music that I had tracked and produced mixed by somebody else.
That's
a long story
your
as
own
to
solo
why.
record you're talking about.
Yeah, so he mixed the majority of my album that's called Fallborn, and it's a solo album called Fallborn, but it really represents the period of my band Fallborn, which was like between 2006, 2007,
which broke up,
up to 2010,
and then you had to release it anyways.
I just felt because it was
because I told you to.
It was because you told me to.
Come on, bro.
It was all through 2009 that I was working with Jack, like once a month ish or something, mixing those songs.
Did you do that to learn secretly? Like, was a part of that because you wanted to learn?
No, I was really hard headed and didn't want to learn anything.
I always wanted that because there are other artists that I like that I know mix their own stuff sometimes, and then once in a while, we produce this next record with so and so.
Yeah.
And the next one is they're a solo again, and I always think, I wonder if part of it was they wanted to learn from that producer, or they wanted to see how they would do it, or how they would approach this record.
I ended up getting there fairly quickly, but it was sort of, there was a curiosity there. Like when,
yeah, that's all I mean. Yeah,
it was 2005 or 2006 when Chris Lord-Alge had mixed the Jeremy Camp stuff, and then he also worked with him maybe 5 or 6 times, but he mixed Jesse McCartney's second record song we did, Right Where You Want Me. Then he mixed a lot, I think everything that we did on the Restored album by Jeremy Camp, which is, we produced half that record. Then he mixed Let It Fade. Then yeah, my favorite half. Then he mixed a few other things, and then Cherry Bomb, which is an all-girl rock band on Hollywood Records. And we produced the majority of that record, and he mixed that. And every experience, I think I've worked with Chris at 3 different studios he was in.
Oh, wow.
The one he was in for the longest, and I think that was back when he had mixed like American Idiot, Green Day. And then there was one in the middle where he's like renting a space up in the valley, and then now he's at his own spot in Tarzana, which was previously like a historic studio. And it was interesting to see him kind of like every few years or something. And so I'll tell the story. What was the thing that I was thanking Jack for? Oh, when I heard him mix my tones, things I had recorded,
right?
It was
Jack
such
or
a
Chris Lord-Alge?
Jack, a huge learning experience, because all the other stuff was stuff that Andy and I had recorded for other people, and it was a little bit. It was still fascinating and awesome to hear like somebody else's take on it, because we always had rough mixes, and I was always a fan of Chris Lord-Alge because he just got such great drum sounds and
huge sounds.
And Jack I was a fan of, but knew less about him, and I would hear things that I loved and hear things that I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then he's much more of a, I would say, chameleon mixed with he has a much more artistic approach, meaning like he'll make choices that blow, like, to me, when he mixed some of my songs, I'd be like, that is the opposite of how I want it to sound.
That's got to be
now.
weird.
Granted, that's probably good to somebody, like objectively, but
I noticed
I have tons of notes right now, and then other ones he would nail it. Like the first song he mixed was "The Wrong Side" from the Fallborn record, and it was just, dude, this is amazing.
That surprise major chord.
Very,
Isn't that the one?
That song was killer, and then he mixed "Back to You" was an amazing mix. That one, when I compare that to my rough mix, that's where the learning happened. I was like, wow, how did he do that? What happened? And then I started to, it just basically raised the bar on my mixing. It's like, if that's possible with my stuff, granted he has a $1 million Neve console, but it's more than the gear.
Sure.
It ain't
You're
the
getting
tool, it's the fool.
It's the fool. You're getting his perspective. One thing I was going to just interject real quick on that record, because I've heard a lot of your stuff for years, all of your stuff for years. And the first thing I noticed on his mixes was some of the vocal effect treatments, like just some stuff that I never heard you do to your own voice, like some slapbacks or certain things that I just thought was really cool, because it was interesting to hear your stuff mixed through someone else.
Yeah.
And that's such a obvious thing up front, the vocal treatment.
He's especially good with vocals too. One of the main, probably the most like notes I gave him throughout that process was on drum sounds. Like he's not somebody who is famous for real punchy big drums.
That's your thing.
He does it. Chris Lord-Alge is more the guy for punchy big drums.
Yeah, fat punchy.
Whereas Jack will just be like, you know what? I'm going to turn the hi-hats almost all the way down. I'm going to make the kick really thin, and the snare is just going to be real splatty. even though you gave him tracks that may have spoken to the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll just create a feeling, and he's like, that's all I care about is the song.
Sure, that's great.
And so there was some times where, I mean, I would come in and the snare would just be like
garbage,
basically the opposite of what I loved or intended.
Yeah.
And so I'd have to like, can you just make the snare literally sound like you're hitting concrete with a baseball bat? You know, like I don't ever want to lose the attack. And then to his credit, he's like, reaches right over, knows exactly what to do. Bing bong, bing bong.
And there it is.
And then boom, like to the point where it could be too much, you know?
Yeah.
And there's another song where he made the vocals so insanely bright that I couldn't believe it. And I was like, man, if I had weeks to live with this, I might actually hear it his way and agree. But
yeah.
And then in other ways, one of the big things that I learned from him was that, and he said this, he said, the ear can really, or the brain, I guess, can really only focus on roughly 3 things
at a time.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, this is cool.
So he's always thinking that way.
And what the listener is going to be hearing.
Yeah, and where your attention is. So often he would do things that were counterintuitive to somebody who's like in love with everything in the song. Because one of the worst things you can do as a mixer is make everything sound good
and important
when you solo it. Like, I can solo the guitar and it's the most perfect guitar sound I've ever heard. Solo this then, everything sounds great
on its own.
And then you have everything trying to be the focal point at the same time.
Yeah.
And then what you have is this like wall of sound where everything's bright and everything's huge and it's all fighting for your attention.
Yeah.
And then it's like nothing gets your attention because everything's trying for it.
Yeah.
So what he would do is he would make certain things, like I said, like on my song Blink, which ended up as the last song on my Murder Yesterday record. It was the one song that I kind of pulled off the Fallborn thing.
Yeah.
And that was the song where we had theorized that song as being a real driving sort of 8th note, like, for you blink and it's gone. There's like hi-hats doing that and then ride doing that. And there's guitars playing 8th notes and the piano's playing. It was a real driving song. And he turned the hi-hats almost all the way down and completely brought it into like a quarter note feeling song.
Oh, wow.
And made it all about the boom, boom, and the piano, and made the vocal really huge and downplayed everything else. And at the end of the day, it was so much more the right thing. It just made the song all about the lyrics, all about the vocal.
So cool.
Brought out the timeless aspects, downplayed everything about it that could be considered Coldplay oriented or something.
Yeah.
But so I realized like 2 big things is that what it did is it influenced the way I thought about how things interrelate in a mix. So I'll be willing to make certain things really dark so that your focal point is more simplified, and that, and then also harmonic distortion. I could tell that what he was doing was really enriching things with subtle levels of distortion, so that there was a lot more depth and bigness. And like when I heard that done to tracks I had recorded, hearing what's possible, all of a sudden it was like, well, now all I have to do is just push and push and push and get to the point where I'm hearing all those same layers of harmonic complexity.
How did he do that? You said individually on individual tracks, he would add some sort of gain, or
all over the place. Distortion? Yeah, I mean, he's got he's got a real Fairchild, which is over $30,000 for that compressor if you want to buy it.
So he's just pushing that into that a little bit and distorting the.
Yeah, so he's got that times a million. I mean, if everybody out there who doesn't know who Jack is Google Jack Joseph Puig, Puig, and you'll see pictures of him in the studio. And he's the guy who's known for having all the best and most sought after gear from like the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and present. He's got everything. That's been his thing. Like there are pictures of him that are just ridiculous looking because of the amount of gear that he has. Yeah. And he knows how to use it. And he comes from the old school where he can, take that gear apart and know like, oh, I'm going to replace the transformer. Like he actually knows, like the reason why they're called engineers, because in the old school, they were actually engineers. They knew how to take the board apart and They were electronic engineers. So he has some of that in him, and that's why he has custom plugins that are modeling plugins for the Fairchild and the
which I've seen you use. His Fairchild one.
Yeah,
Quite
I love that. It's just a great sounding plugin. So that was interesting. And then we were talking about something else, though. We got off the subject.
Originally? Well, you were originally talking about...
perception and music.
Yeah.
Yeah, so... Anyways, we don't need to
go.
go backwards, but just... It's fascinating to think of how different people hear music. And to just be able to see the forest for the trees.
Well, you were saying how if you're mixing something, you don't want to get caught up in the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah.
But there is a time, there is a point where you want to do that.
You just need to know while you're doing it that it's affecting a whole. You know?
Yeah, you tweak this instrument, it's going to affect the vocal or whatever is the most important thing.
Yeah.
I heard, I'm going to quote Chris Carnigan. He told me one time when I was recording with him that at every point in a song, something has to be the star. You know, so that speaks both ways. Like, you don't want to bore the listener where this section is, the vocal's not happening right here or whatever, but the band's just playing. Well, something has to be the star there too. Otherwise, you're just like, okay, now we're bored.
Right.
Now we're hearing the band play, but nothing's the star. And same thing you said earlier, not everything could be the star either, because if you have more than one star, you can't focus on all of them, or they just fight each other, or they mush each other up or something.
That gets into the power of contrast. If something's the star here, and it's like switch 'em ups.
Somebody should put that in a book or something. Somebody should write a book.
Yeah, I don't know. But
you should have one of your books right here so we can just flash it to the camera every time we... You don't have a stack of books around here?
And also like a picture of myself. Yeah, but that's a super important... That's almost like what Jack was saying about you can only focus on 3 things at a time. But it's not that it's the same 3 throughout the whole song. It's like sometimes it switches and...
You should.
Yeah, just how to stay not bored.
3 things. That's interesting.
If you think about it, that's what makes a 3-piece power rock band.
Ooh, because you can hear everybody.
Everybody has their spot and a lot of real estate to play around.
That's a good point, yeah. That's also, I've had a couple 3-piece bands in my life, and they're super fun. It's a little frustrating because if you want to layer things, it's harder to do it. You know, do we run tracks on this song because we want this? Or then you think, no, we're just going to keep it real and we're going to keep it. But it's hard because there's only 3 instruments. So not only do you not want to clutter, but you also have a certain space you have to fill up. Like you're saying, you know, there's only, sonic real estate.
Yeah.
Same thing with a live 3-piece band. You all have to know your role. And like, okay, my area as a guitar player is the mid-range or whatever. Like I got to do all that. I got to fill up all of this. Then you're like, okay, maybe I need some effects to help with that, some delays or some reverbs or something that branch out. And like, you're the bass player, you have to fill up all of this. I can't do that anymore, you know. And then you're the drummer, you have to fill up that.
Yeah,
yeah. I love that because it's a chess game at that point. You're like, okay, this is my job, this is my role.
Yeah.
I have to play my role, and that's my favorite bands do that. Everybody has their role, and you don't see more than one guy trying to do one thing. If everybody has their own thing and their own place, like even melodically, but especially tonally, if there's more than one guitar player in a band, you know, it's the worst when both guys are playing the same thing and they have the same amps. You're like, what? You don't need those guys. You don't need that guy. Get rid of him. You can make more money if you get rid of that guy. You know what I mean? You want to have completely different personalities, I think, if you have more than one person playing the same instrument.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think 3-piece power trio, that's what people refer to it as. I mean, some of the most famous ones that spring to mind are the early ones, like the Police, Rush.
Well, technically, like Zeppelin is kind of, I'm not gonna say power trio, but if you have a singer that's just the singer, and then you have bass, guitar, and drums, that's still kind of a 3-piece.
Yeah,
in a
that's the paradigm is bass, drums, guitar. Because you got
the vocal's always going to do
low end rhythm that's kind of across all the spectrums, and then you have the mid range, and that's just like it. And throw the vocal on top.
And Zeppelin did that great. I mean, the recordings, especially stuff that's just them jamming.
Now, who's Led Zeppelin?
I'll show them to you sometime. You'll really like them. I think you'll really like them.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Police.
They're all dead now.
Zeppelin is like the bulldog of let's put a dog on
the black dog.
The black dog. They're like the black dog. And then the Police would be sort of like maybe a greyhound.
Yeah, fast and furious.
Fast and skinny and everything's pokey. And
you said Stuart Copeland's drumming was angular one time, and I was like, yeah, it's perfect.
It's very angular. There was a guy that there was two different mixes. I think. Oh, here's an example of working with Chris Lord-Alge. It was the Jesse McCartney single, Right Where You Want Me, and I've always been this way where like I love mixing my own stuff, and whenever we've worked with another mixer, it's been because the label has been like, adding this guy will.
It's a name recognition thing.
Yeah, it was always a combination. I'm sure of they get great results, but also
he's attached to it now. Yeah,
and Chris Lord-Alge is somebody who's famous. He used to get points on records, so he was getting like a producer point, like a percentage of the record. Most mixers could never ask for that, but he started. The success of those records ended up partially getting attributed to him, so he'd get a chunk of it. So a lot of big selling records, he was getting back end royalties on it when most mixers just get paid a fee and they're done.
But anyways, definitely see a case for that to be made.
Yeah, especially in his heyday, like the 90s and early 2000s, he was just killing it, doing all of the biggest records, especially in rock, but also in country and all over the place. So anyways, when we were making this Right Where You Want Me song, we were trying to nail the mix too and get hired for it. And
while you're doing it,
yeah. So even after, this is how, I don't know what you'd call it, but motivated, it's a good version, but this is how motivated we were. We wanted to beat Chris's mix.
Yeah.
And there was something about his mix that we didn't love.
Yeah.
Particularly me, I didn't love a couple little details about it. Funnily enough, it was the snare drum. And
just a little detail.
So the biggest difference, once we heard his mix, then the bar was raised like, oh, shoot. All right, let's try to get it. He's got this.
Oh, so you had his mix.
We had his mix, and then we tried to up the game on our rough mix.
To who? To the labels, peoples?
Yeah. To present to the artist and the label and hope, because basically he completely replaced our snare with a big fatty snare. And obviously when you hear his mixes, it was a great mix, but it was like the song was like
you wanted a short, snappy.
And I had given him a real kind of cracky snare.
Okay, gotcha.
Which has always kind of been my thing as a drummer and what I love. And he sent back this fat thing, and I'm like, ah. So I sent the mix out to everybody, and one of the co-writers, this guy Dory LaBelle.
Cool name.
He had played guitar with Backstreet Boys and then became Jesse's guitar player and co-wrote a lot of these songs. And I remember we sent both mixes to everybody, including him, and he sent back two pictures. A picture of like a bulldog and a picture of a greyhound. And he's like, It's apples and oranges. Yeah. Yours makes the song feel faster and more like snappy, and then his sounds like a big fat dog. I just thought that was like the perfect response.
That's pretty cool.
Because he was trying to be extremely political too. Like, there's this and there's this.
That sounds like drumming synesthesia to me. Like he just saw a greyhound when he heard your snare drum.
He hears things and sees animals.
Yeah, it's a thing.
All right. It is a thing.
Dun, dun, dun. We've hit an hour.
We have hit an hour.
It was quick.
I think you should do stupid questions.
Should I ask you a stupid question?
Yeah.
I don't have any stupid questions. I'll have to.
That's a stupid statement.
Excuse me?
Think of one. Okay, I'll ask you a stupid question.
Okay. Intro.
Stupid questions. Describe to me, from your perspective, both subjectively, both subjectively and objectively.
Okay.
What you can choose between? I'll give you two choices. The impact that either Justin Bieber or Taylor Swift has had
on me as a human.
Just how you perceive the impact they've had on culture and music.
Okay, not on me. Because they've had no impact on me. Other than my daughter loves...
How do you know?
Shake it off, shake it off. She loves that song.
And
she'll
what
sing
impact
every
has that
word.
had on you? Has it made your life worse
Makes
or better?
my heart happy.
Okay, to see her
Unless
happy.
she wants to hear it 15 times in a row and dance in the kitchen, then it's like, okay, we've heard this song. Right now it's...
okay, so we're going Taylor.
Right, okay.
So what...
Oh, we have to pick one.
Yeah.
There is a Biebs song that I like, though. I'm going to
Which?
admit it on this podcast.
Which one?
Smoking in a na 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 na. That's the verse. What's the chorus go?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm old.
We've talked about this song. It's so good.
It's not Sorry, is it?
No, it's like a newer one, I think. New, maybe not new. I can't think of the chorus. Anyways, we're talking about Taylor Swift.
Boring. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah. What now? The question is, what impact do I think she's had on culture? She's a big one.
Culture
though,
and
because
music.
She writes her own songs, right? Kind of.
That's a good question.
Is that a question for her?
Well, I know a secret about her.
Okay, but she's marketed like she writes her own songs.
Right.
She has her own. She does have her own
So
guitar.
do you think she does?
I would imagine that she at least co-writes most of her,
Okay.
or comes in with an idea, as opposed to a lot of pop people are just
Yeah.
looking for songs, right?
And it's well known that a few of her hits in recent years have been Max Martin at least co-writes.
Mm-hmm.
Max Martin is one of, if you don't know, he's one of the most
Genius.
He's a really incredible pop songwriter and kind of got famous during the early boy band years of the
Did he?
crossover, like 1999, 2000. But just,
He wrote
I
all those.
think he's up there in the as many number ones or close to it as the Beatles and stuff like that.
Wow. I'll tell you the only thing I can speak on besides my daughter dancing to Taylor Swift at home is her record 1982. Is that what it's called?
I think
1982.
so, yeah.
Ryan Adams covered the entire record, and he
Yeah.
put it out. I think he did it on a whim. Like, he's known to be cruising around New York at night and being
On
like,
a whim,
whim?
also known as super good business plan.
What is?
Take one of the top selling artist
he knew what he was
songs.
doing. On a whim, meaning
He just like threw it together.
he always changes his band up, and it's kind of known that he'll just bring his friends in the studio. I got an idea, and just bring friends in the studio and just record. And all of his stuff's real raw, so you can tell it's just kind of like done.
Yeah, he's really
You can
prolific.
tell that's
writer.
how. Yeah, you can tell that's how he did the record. I think they did it in like a weekend, and then they put it out, and it was out at the same time Taylor Swift's original record was out, and they were both on the charts at the same time. And it's the only time this ever happened. You've had two versions of the same record
Whoa.
on the Billboard chart. Super crazy. But his version of the record is so cool, and I know she likes it too because I've seen interviews where she's like, just gushing, and he's gushing because the songs are good. But he did that thing where he brought out, because that record is real production oriented. It's very pop specific thing.
Right.
And then he really just kind of took a guitar and slowed some of the songs down and really brought the songs out, which is one of the coolest things you can do, I think, at doing a cover, is you pull that song out of its style to show it in a simplified light.
Yeah,
or
reveal
whatever.
its core foundational guts as a song.
So I don't listen to Taylor Swift, but I've listened to Ryan Adams' version of Taylor Swift's record so many times because it's just so good. And some of those songs. And then it's funny, like I heard that record in full before I heard her record. So then I remember hearing one of those songs from her record and going like,
They sound
this
like the
sounds familiar.
covers of the Ryan Adams
Yeah,
version.
and I think, whatever, I think the covers are, for me, I like them better. That's the only interaction I've ever had with Taylor Swift, other than culturally, she did a big thing with Spotify, right? Wasn't she pioneering? She took her music off Spotify to make a statement saying that they're not paying people enough. I think her stuff's on it now. It's on Spotify now, but she was fighting the streaming wars.
Which is interesting
cool.
because, it's either cool or Adele did a similar thing, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder what the real motivation was, because it could be
Makes them look
that
good,
it makes them look good, but at the same time they know she has such rabid fans and this is what the logic was with when Adele did that, when she just wanted people to buy the record. They know like they're going to make less if it's on Spotify, less money, more if people buy it. So they were kind of flexing their fame muscles.
But it also brings awareness to the bigger picture, right? not
does.
just them. It's
I
the
just
same
wonder how
thing.
much of a percentage of each it was. Because if you're like,
I'm sure,
look,
it made a difference.
there's
in their,
millions of people who just want my album no matter where, and they're willing to pay for it. I'll just keep it off Spotify, make more money those first couple months, and then sort of go, oh, okay, I'll put it on Spotify once actual sales taper.
I would like to think that it's more of a altruistic.
Yeah,
Did I
altruistic.
say that right? It's kind of like when Napster first came out, and Lars, the drummer from Metallica, was all up in everybody's face, and he was in court, and they got a ton of backlash for that.
They did.
But now people look back and say he was right. Lars was right, because they kind of saw it coming. And the whole time, everybody's like, "Oh, Metallica, they're millionaires. They don't need the money from the records." And that's the first thing, like the cynical way to look at it. But even they were saying, like, this isn't really necessarily for us. This is for other bands that are going to be screwed by this.
Yeah, it's just hard to hear that from him.
Right, especially when it's someone that's like a blowhard, like Lars.
Oh man,
I'm a huge fan.
He's
but
hard to listen to.
That guy will just talk. Yeah,
but
he's hard to listen to sometimes.
And everybody's motives are.
Yeah.
You
When
know,
you start looking at their motives,
there's always a percentage of self-interest.
Italian.
There's always. It's hard to get a human being to have 100% pure,
Right.
unselfish, unself-interested even motives. There's one thing, and it's good. I mean, we're built to sort of look out for ourselves on some level before we look out for others. But in those cases, it's really kind of interesting.
Anytime someone gets on a soapbox, when you're watching it, you're instantly like, wait a minute, what's really going on with this guy? Every time someone stands up and starts preaching, you get a little suspect.
It's sort of like holding a press conference to talk about how much you've given to charity or something.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, okay.
But if it's a big artist that's world famous and they're bringing attention to an issue in the music industry,
it can be good.
It can be totally good.
It can be self-serving and good
at the same time.
At the same time. Maybe that's sort of one of the, I guess that's in life kind of what, that's like the golden ticket in a way. If you can find a way to sort of give and get, and it's very good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I've found here, to take a left turn. That's what I've found that I really love about teaching, and teaching in a way that I don't know, gives something back to me. Like, I really love creating while passing knowledge down, and doing it in a paradigm where it's not, it's in a little, it's like our little safe place. We're in the circle of trust, the tree of trust, where there isn't somebody else, there isn't a record label.
I thought we were in the trust tree right now.
There isn't a record label or an A&R guy or a manager or even the concept of money entering the room. Like, is this going to sell? But the idea that you're just making music and trying to enhance your access to your own gifting and learn how to express yourself without any other motives than for the goal of expression.
I got to say,
great.
I love the way you teach, because we've talked about teaching before, and I've taught music in the sense of like guitar lessons, because that's another thing. Like, the second someone sees you play guitar and they see that you can play an instrument, whether it is whatever it is, there's inevitably going to be someone that's like, oh, hey, do you give lessons? I want to learn. And then when you're young, you're like, oh, cool, someone wants to learn from me.
Yeah.
And then you realize you're not a teacher, because you're like, oh, wait, I have to pick apart everything I do and then explain it to someone. It's not that easy. So I've always had, it's cringe worthy for me when I hear teaching music or something, but the way that you approach it is completely different. And you get your students hands-on, and you're more about the process and teaching them how to like get into that process in their own way. Really cool. Just a little
well, thanks, man.
Just a little ding.
Gold star. It comes, the approach to teaching comes from a maybe just a place of being so conscious of how I'm thinking about what I do, and then how to integrate the non-cognitive or logical aspects or non-technical parts, like how to combine the technical and emotional, so that you're using technique only to serve intent, like expressionistic intent. And so I think I mentioned this in the other podcast, but just I've always felt like I need to have a way that I think about things in order to do it, or like an approach, or just
framework,
being very intentional, or framework to work.
Heart set, mindset, and a heart set.
Yeah, and so I think sharing that, it's so hard. One for me, like it's something that I've really had to push through, like to become a better singer and a better mixer. It's always been this struggle of trying to like find my own ways of thinking about it and doing it, and struggling to get there, and then learning like, oh, if I just think about it like this, you get there, you get the results so much faster. And so helping people get inside how they're perceiving things, so that you can,
that's huge.
Like I have this little chart that I made for a way to think about EQ. It just has like 20K to 20 hertz, which is just human hearing sort of brackets, low end, high end, and then just some general like words to sort of describe like layman's terms, like, oh, this is really barky sounding, or this is real screechy sounding, or this sounds sizzly, or this is real resonant. And it's a way to sort of connect in common language yourself to the more technical scientific terms. So like
the feeling of it.
To the feeling of it. So you're like, oh, that's really barky sounding, and then you can go to like the 900 hertz to 1K, or you know.
Because for something you might want the barky sound, right?
Yeah.
For this song, it's got and I want to bark.
Yeah.
Or this song, I want more of the sizzle thing to the vocal or whatever.
Yeah, just to help you have a cognitive handhold that relates to something that's much more visceral, and connect the two.
Yeah.
And I love helping to get inside, you know, a young artist's head and just kind of go like, how are you hearing music, and what are you seeing, and what little bit of info can I help throw in there that's going to maybe just expedite your process to getting where you want to go.
Cool.
Where it's about them and helping them go there, and equipping them in a way that's like matches their skill set and heart set, and where they want to see themselves. And I just feel like hidden within us, almost like the tree is hidden in the seed. Like there's this potential, what we're really passionate about and drawn to, and our natural gifting is sort of like the map to where we want to go. And a lot of times people question that, or try to just pick a place they wish they were, or
look at someone else.
And try to copy it or compare, and
which is not always a bad place to start, right?
Yeah, I think we at a certain point in our development, just parroting something, copying it.
Yeah.
It's one of the ways we learn, and then we learn, okay, that helped me get here, but it's not it's not the whole story.
Yeah.
But I believe that part of what this like seed metaphor is, that the things we're drawn to, if we're drawn to them from a non-regressive standpoint, like not from an ego standpoint, like if you're drawn to an artist because like, oh, like I want to be a singer because that singer gets a lot of chicks. So that means if I'm a singer, I'll get a lot of chicks. That's like a surface level, maybe,
or even just fans, right? Like they're doing something that's working.
Yeah, validation.
So maybe I should copy them.
I want to be loved. I can work. Right. But if you love something because you feel like emotionally like drawn to it, then it's not that copying them is necessarily a bad maybe part of your journey, but it's more that there's something about what they create that's there's something about them and their creation that says something about you and what you would create. And so unpacking that and going like, you guys are kindred spirits. Like even though they're famous or maybe successful, they're just a person creating stuff, you know, either by themselves or in collaboration. And so like you can, unpacking why you love something will help you get in touch with who you are and what you're doing in such a way where you won't copy as much. You'll just go like, oh, I'm inspired by somebody who's further down the road, who has a similar set of tastes and is expressing similar emotions.
And you recognize what they do.
You recognize what they do and why.
Yeah.
It's kind of like getting in touch with their why. Their why is similar to your why. And so focusing back on your why and how to translate that is sort of the key to getting where you're going.
That's a great thing to tell an artist. Do you ask some of your students what their biggest influences are and who they listen to? and then start there.
I've created a questionnaire that has
that's part of the questionnaire, yeah.
tons of questions in there that are about even things like, what are your favorite movies, or what are the feelings you feel the most often? Top 3 feelings.
Oh, wow.
And so I look for the correlations between the two. Like if somebody's like, all I ever do is I feel depressed and I feel frustrated and angry most of the time. And then what are your 3 favorite movies? Oh, like Tommy Boy and Bad Grandpa.
Comedies,
like, oh, well, what's going on here? Like they go to art to be taken away from how they feel most of the time. So I'll kind of draw those parallels and then ask questions about it. Like, because you'd expect maybe that they would, an artistic temperament would maybe, you'd see like dark movies. Their favorite movies would be sort of representative of their feelings. Like they're going there for some sort of comfort or kinship with the art they like. But if you see a disconnect, that to me is like a little, it's just like a little red blinking light. That's like, oh, let's dive into what psychologically is going on.
Yeah.
And what, do you want to create art that brings people out of where they're at to somewhere else? And some people want to create art that meets you where you are. Like that's kind of where my own music, like I like to be introspective and sort of go into the feelings. So I'll be attracted to music that's sort of a mirror of what I feel, as opposed to wanting to escape how I feel and go somewhere else. So anyways, I think that's really important, is to sort of unpack that kind of stuff.
Don't you give up. No, 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 let me love you. That's the one I was thinking of.
That's a great melody.
That's the Bieber song I like.
Yeah.
Just so everybody knows that I do like one Justin Bieber song.
I dig that.
Great
That's
song.
a very I think as a songwriter, the moment you hear that, you're like, that was sitting out there.
Yeah, and
for
they
the
grabbed
taking.
it.
Because it was
Those little melodies.
It's a pattern.
Yep. And it's a lot of times it's like almost an obvious, or feels obvious when you hear it. Like, how come I didn't think of that? It's right there.
It seems, but then it's the juxtaposition of that lyric with that melody.
Oh yeah,
how they set it up. It's like nailed it.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Should we wrap?
Let's wrap.
Put a bow on this baby.
Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna start rapping.
See you guys next time.
Peace.
And it's over like that. Good night.